Welcome everybody. I'm Rob Scott from UC Today, and welcome to another one of our panel discussions. Today we're going to delve into the world of UCaaS and CPaaS and the merits of developing your own cloud communications platform. So I'm really excited to be here today. I've got a great lineup of speakers, so just like to start with some introductions. So welcome Fazil.
Thanks, Rob. Hi, my name is Fazil Balkaya, founder and principal analyst at Balkaya Consulting. For the ones who don't know me, I work very closely with Kaval Group and Synergy Research Group as well, in addition to my independent consulting work. And when I'm not traveling or meeting with Rob in a conference, I'm based in Turkey.
Thanks, Fazil. Irwin, welcome.
Hi, I'm Irwin Lazar, Vice President and Service Director at Nemertes Research. We're a US-based research advisory service headquartered in Chicago. I'm based in the Washington, D.C. area, and I cover pretty much anything that falls into the real-time communication and collaboration market.
Thanks, Irwin. And welcome, Phil.
Hi, Phil Edholm, Principal of PKE Consulting. I do consulting and analysis across real-time communications, very much focused more on applications and how this integration with applications is transforming the way we communicate.
Great, thanks, Phil. Okay, so let's get started with the first question. And Fazil, this one goes to you. So how would you explain the difference between CPaaS and UCaaS to someone that's just started out researching cloud communications?
Sure. I think it's also very important to define what UCaaS and CPaaS is before moving into the different differences between those two services. So to me, let's start with the overall. AAS of UCaaS and CPaaS means as a service. So it means that you're taking a service from someone else's data center, or in other words, cloud. So if you take private clouds out of the picture for a while, both CPaaS and UCaaS are services provided from cloud in some sort of a shared environment that's either a micro business or a very large enterprise shares with other businesses in the world. So that's what AAS means essentially for cloud communications. UCaaS generally refers to procuring traditional communication services from a vendor or a service provider, and although the marketing norm for UCaaS can mean a lot of things, we refer to UCaaS as generally PBX plus some sort of a collaboration services that could include messaging, presence, conferencing, video, and anything that's around those. In general, UCaaS is priced at a per month, per seat basis, and UCaaS is generally a bundled service that's ready to deploy and use. Yes, UCaaS can require some integration and some sort of due diligence for enterprises to deploy, but generally it's a bundled service that's ready to consume. CPaaS, on the other hand, refers to some sort of or a mode of communication services that's generally isolated from others. Yes, you can package or bundle CPaaS services, but CPaaS is generally priced at an interaction basis. There are some aspects of CPaaS that's priced at a per month basis, like telephone numbers in some cases, but generally the exposed APIs are priced at a per interaction basis, which is the main differential between CPaaS and UCaaS, I would say.
Yeah, so essentially APIs delivered as a cloud service. Okay. Anyone else got anything else to add in there?
I think it's important to step back from these product designations, which really are vendor categories of solutions, and step back and talk about the problems we're trying to solve. I mean, I would argue that today all businesses have to provide three kinds of communications to their organizations. The first is employee communications. Those are communications that employees use in the structural process of their job. And so if you think about it, a PBX, a phone on the desk, is employee communications, as is Zoom if I'm using it for video conferencing as part of my job. So that's the first kind. It turns out UCaaS is a solution set that is primarily oriented towards employee communications. And those are communications, by the way, that are initiated by the employee. So think about this video call. we got an announcement, but we each started the video call ourselves. It was initiated by us. Rob set out the announcement. This is all a human managed activity, this call, as is almost all employee communication. Second kind of communications is customer communication. We know that today as the contact center. That's when you have an employee interacting with a customer and you want to monitor and manage it and do analytics. The third part, which is the part that really is changing, is application communication. So those are communications where the communication event is instantiated, started by an application representing a business process. That notification you get of your impending dental appointment, that is an application communicated, implemented by a CPaaS platform. CPaaS platforms, the reason they have APIs is the APIs are how applications talk to the platform to initiate that application event. And what you can think about is a Venn diagram where all three of these are coming together. And you begin to see this transition, right? I get a notification, I have an appointment. It says, if you can't make it, click this number to reschedule. Oh, I can't make it, I click them. Now I'm talking to an employee. So I've moved from application communications, now I'm in customer communication. So we want to monitor, that, we want to record it, we want to do analytics. Now it turns out I need to have an expert, there's a specialist, and that person I'm talking to needs to talk to the expert. They may use a UC system, i.e. employee communications, to get the right person lined up. So as a company, you're going to use all of these capabilities, these platforms, in delivering those services. I think it's really important to step back to say, how are we using communications to change our business processes and our organization? Are we doing it by giving our employees new tools like UCaaS, where they have video and collaboration? Are we doing it with CPaaS, where we're integrating notification, other processes? Or are we doing it with customer communications by increasing the capability set, they're adding video, adding AI, et cetera. So I think if you think first about the problems, then what you realize the platforms are things you use in different ways to solve those problems depending upon how your organization does business. Anyway, back to you.
That's great. Irwin, do you have anything to add there at all? I mean, that makes really good sense as well. So.
I would echo, I think, what both gentlemen said earlier, in that we see different audiences for different services. So through unified communications, as Phil mentioned, that's the corporate communication platform, internal communication, business communication, however you want to define it, where we see CPaaS largely today in the purview of application developers that are adding some of the functionality that Phil mentioned. I want to create a notification when a certain business event happens. Or increasingly, you have that option through CPaaS to add other elements of communications into business applications. So yeah, as Phil mentioned today, maybe the primary use case is messaging. You have an appointment, you have a reminder, a shipment notification, whatever information you want to text to a customer or send a voice call out to that customer. But you could also potentially use CPaaS to build your own communication applications or your own communication capabilities into applications. So if I've got a group of users who, the only time they're ever getting on the phone, say they're salespeople, they're in their sales application all day. Maybe I don't want to buy them a full UCaaS license, which gives them a lot of features that they might not use, but I want to give them calling. So through CPaaS, I connect a calling API into my CRM. I allow dial out or dial in through that API, and then I'm only paying for what I'm using. I think that's one of the big differentiators that we've seen. And again, I think to Phil's point, we see a lot of convergence. So a good example, like Vonage last year talking about programmable communication. So that's an area where I call my account representative, and that person's not available, but now I can get dumped into an IVR that allows me to schedule a call back at a certain time based on that IVR through a CPaaS API, having access into that person's calendar. So almost limitless the kind of things you can do with CPaaS, but again, some of that functionality is also available through UCaaS services as well.
Yeah, I think for the uninitiated, one thing I want to come back to, especially if someone's coming into this call, this session, and they're a traditional PBX user, right? They have a traditional premises PBX, it may even be TDM, may not even be VoIP yet. If you think about this platform as a service, there really are, I think, two important thought processes you have to have about the platform as a service. One side of the platform as a service is the economic model of you typically only buy what you use. So it's this change the model from buy something, pay $10,000 for something today and use it for 10 years, Instead, you pay $50 a month or $20 a month or $10 a month as long as you use it. And then when you get to CPaaS, I think as said earlier, it tends to be a per transaction charge. So you pay per notification on the micro penny potentially basis. So if you look at that, that's one part of this platform as a service model, is you basically pay as you use. I think there's a second side, though, that everyone needs to be aware of, which is some of these systems now are built using the software of the cloud. And I think this is something those of us that are comms people need to understand. There's been an incredibly profound change in how software is developed. All this power of computers in the cloud is being used to make the development of software much easier. The software itself much less efficient because we have huge power to run it. But what it does, it allows Irwin's comment about how you can do that quick integration. You can now do things literally with 10 lines of code. I can integrate sending a message to every customer that's going to meet with any of my salespeople in 2 days. I can implement that in the cloud with literally a few lines of code. And this is the power of that application integration side, which comes through APIs. Very important.
Yeah, it's really interesting. That kind of trend that we're seeing from a publication perspective is kind of that low code, no code conversation. So yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with that. Which leads me nicely onto my next question around kind of UCaaS platforms and the integration capabilities and developer toolkits that we see certainly amongst attached or available through those major UCaaS platforms. So I'll use RingCentral as an example. They've got quite a substantial, quite prominent developers toolkit available. Is that CPaaS? Would you consider that CPaaS in today's world? Because it's not necessarily a messaging platform. It's more than that.
I'll jump in. I wouldn't necessarily consider that. It's because it's essentially adding functionality to the UCaaS offering. So I can take that RingCentral business office solution and integrate it into workflows, integrate it into business processes. But I'm not paying on that per transactional basis. I'm not buying a specific, I need a messaging integration into an order management application. That's where I kind of see the drawing of the line. I'd say also, within our research, we typically see UCaaS in the purview of the communication groups, the ones that had traditionally run PBXs. But when we're talking to them about CPaaS, they're sort of look at the responses typically, well, maybe my application developers are doing that. So today there's still a little bit of a split, I think, within enterprises. We do see that converging. We do see that over the next year, roughly about 28% of the last 500 companies we studied were bringing development capabilities into their unified communication group. So there's still, I think, almost a clear, maybe a little bit of a demarcation, that you're not thinking about consumable APIs if you're thinking about business communication, internal communication, but that has been more focused on customer outbound facing communication.
Yep, and to add on top of that, I think RingCentral is a good example of someone not being CPaaS but UCaaS. So RingCentral is not selling consumable APIs. RingCentral is selling a service that's priced per month, per seat basis, and you can access that service through APIs when you embed that. But they're not selling consumable APIs. I think that's the main difference between integration and CPaaS here, and it's similar to a norm that was confused a few years ago. There was always a discussion between federation versus integration, and federation was always confused with integration at those points. So CPaaS is not same as integration. Those are two different things, and people like RingCentral, by exposing APIs of their servers, enables access to their services through a different pane of glass. That's what they're doing. They're not offering CPaaS services.
So I think it's really important as we talk about this, the way these new products interact with other things. This is really the convergence of communications with the rest of information processing, right? It's with applications, with service. So if you think about that, there actually are three ways that's being done. And two of them are predominantly in UCaaS. And the first is general integration. So if you look at almost all the UCaaS vendors, almost all have an integration with Salesforce. So if you're using Salesforce as your CRM platform, if you buy this UCaaS product, all of a sudden you'll be able to click in Salesforce and make this call. And that integration is very much to a specific application. So if you look at, Salesforce, Dynamics, there are a set of lists of things people support. The second kind of integration are integration tools, the if this, then that kind of tools. These are tools that people build essentially the two ends of a connector to, so you can say, if this happens here, do this over here. And by using those with a UCaaS platform, you can say, well, if I get an email, send me a text message or make a phone call to me and I had an email. And those are kind of integrations that are done almost that drag and click. They're codeless, they're easy to do. Then there's the third part, which is the API. And APIs require code and programming. Those are used a lot less in UCaaS because UCaaS, again, is about users and user integration of the other applications users use. CPaaS and this application integration is integrating to business processes, which are not written as general applications. Often they're written by the organization, the back end. So I think one of the things is especially for people that are coming from a comms world and don't understand this world of integrations and web services and all that, three kinds of integrations. Bespoke, specific integrations, think Salesforce. General integrations, think Zapier, and if this, then that. There are ways of doing very quick codeless integrations. And then the final is the API. That's where you have to have someone who knows software, who knows your program, who knows databases. That's where you get to real work. So I think you get a lot of the value in UCaaS. You get very unique value using integrations without ever writing a line of code. And that's a fundamental, again, primary difference between the two. So coming back to our build versus buy question, it's an interesting thing that if you buy the right product, the build becomes easy. With another product, the same kind of build must be much more difficult. So if you've got a UCaaS platform, you want to do this, it may be much easier to do it there than to go do it separately in CPaaS. Back to you.
Thanks, Phil. That's a really great way of categorizing the different options there for customers as well. I really like that. In terms of, let's home in on one of the biggest vendors or the biggest vendor in CPaaS, Twilio. Why have they been so successful? I suppose what I'm trying to say is, why CPaaS, why now? What did we have before and what do we have now that Twilio really is pioneering?
Guys, I'm going to jump in and hit this because I actually come from the background. So, in 2008, we had a product at Nortel called ACE, and it was a web services integration platform that worked between the PBX and the application. And the problem was, it actually worked really well. But the only people who could use it were people who had our PBX. So you limit yourself to 15, 20% of the market. But the second bigger issue was, at that time, the communication group and the application group, basically for Venus and Mars, they could not communicate. And so our comms guy was bringing this to the application. They couldn't figure out how to explain it to them, vice versa. I think the brilliance of Twilio was realizing that the time had come where you could build it as a service. And so what Twilio did was they took that same concept and said, we're not going to tie it to a PBX. We're not going to build general middleware. We're going to offer it on a per basis in the cloud. The second thing they did was they went for developers. So most companies, when they build a product, they go try to sell it to enterprises, and they go try to sell it to people who have money and pay for it. What Twilio did was they said, no, let's go get a developer community, and then let's show them what we can do. And the reason it exploded is really simple. Your dentist has 3 chairs for cleaning patients. Absent a notification, what percentage of people make their dental appointment? About 60%. 40% miss. So if I make 3 appointments in an hour for my 3 chairs, there's a 100% probability one of those people won't show up if I don't talk to them, which means the chair is empty, I'm paying the attendant, I'm paying for the capital costs, etc. And they cannot overbook like airlines, because if you show up at the dentist for your cleaning, you're told, hey, there's not a chair available, come back later, your reaction is going to be really bad. What the dentist found was they can increase their profitability by 5 to 10% by implementing notifications to make sure people showed up for their appointments. And that really do it. The other thing is 2-party authentication showed up. All the issues in the web, redoing passwords. What people realized was this notification process of SMS allows us to dramatically simplify and reduce cost in things and increase performance in things very rapidly. And by the way, it's just a precursor of the future. I actually have a presentation I did about a year ago at the UC Summit or the BC Summit. And my argument is by 2023, 40 to 45% of all communications in business will be application-initiated communication. The human-initiated communications are going down more and more. They're machine-implemented. Because It turns out only 25% of the workforce in the United States, 15% globally, are the knowledge workers that use today's collaboration tools the way they're designed to be used. 75% of the workers are service and information workers. By the way, if you're interested in that, go to the PKE Consulting website. There's a white paper called KISS, Knowledge Information Service. Talks about different kind of workers. Very important to understand your workers. If you're a large consulting company, Deloitte and Touche, versus a manufacturing company, the communication solutions you're going to buy are profoundly different because of the composition of your workforce. So I think this becomes really important to think through as you look at these solutions is, what is the problem I'm trying to solve and how do I relate solutions to that?
That's really interesting. Fazil, have you got anything to add on there?
Yeah, actually, I'm going to add on top of Phil's comment. You might even be soft when estimating the percent of application-generated communications, because that's actually the IoT of business communications, right? So imagine the dentist sends an SMS to the patient, and then it fetches information from the calendar, and SMS is back saying that I'm busy at this hour, so what's the next best available time slot, without even you interacting with the application. So there is even more potential to that. I think what CPaaS is bringing to the party is external communications, most likely communications outside of your enterprise. And you embed an SMS API, you embed some sort of a calling API within a very short period of time, just a few lines of code, and you're good to go. Imagine a world where if Twilio wasn't here a few years ago, Uber would need to implement a big infrastructure in their data center or in their network somehow, and they would need to integrate some sort of an internal communications with the external communications. They would need some resources that need either UCaaS or some sort of a PBX integration, and that would take at least a few quarters, even if they had the resources internally. But with CPaaS, it's a matter of much shorter time period. That's time to market and expanding your services capabilities. CPaaS is also a great way of enhancing your UCaaS solutions. So if your UCaaS is short of certain functionalities, or you don't need a very wide range of UCaaS services, you can go with CPaaS, and with a more slimmer package or a solution, you're good to go. And the third thing that CPaaS brings to the table is if you are good with coding, if you're a very tech-savvy enterprise and you would like to build your services from the ground up, you can do that. And Twilio also enables a lot of contact center providers today to use Twilio APIs, build everything ground up, and provide a CCaaS service. Now, it's not Twilio Flex. Those guys are using Twilio APIs to build their own contact center as a service offerings using CPaaS services. So those are the three big things I believe CPaaS is bringing to the table.
Yeah, that's a really key point, isn't it? Sorry, Irwin, go on, jump in there.
I was going to say, I think one of the interesting things you mentioned, earlier on the question about the success of Twilio is that, we saw this big influx of CPaaS providers a few years ago, Nexmo and others, TalkBox. One of the things that's happened over the last year is they've all been acquired. ShoreTel bought a CPaaS provider who now is part of Mitel. Nexmo is now part of Vonage, or is Vonage. They've actually eliminated the Nexmo name. So what has happened is that the UCaaS providers have all said, we see value in having either a CCaaS offering or integrating CCaaS into our UCaaS capabilities to enable multi-forms of communication. I think, Phil mentioned the point earlier that there's always been the Venus-Mars effect when you're talking to communications folks about these API capabilities that we see rapidly changing. So roughly I mentioned about 28%, looked up the data point, about 28% of the companies we just studied have development capabilities now within their communication teams. That is a sea change from even 2 years ago when they didn't know how to spell development, and then B, if they were doing development, they were running around trying to find developers or outsource it. So there is that, I think, change fundamentally happening where communication groups understand that for them to stay relevant, they can't just be pushing a service out. They can't just be delivering dial tone and a meeting application and messaging application and that's it. They have to figure out, how do we take those capabilities and embed them in a business process to deliver measurable business value. And we've seen in our research that as organizations are judging the effectiveness of the investments they're making in communication, they want that real verifiable ROI, and they're not going to get that by, well, we rolled out a new phone system. What did that deliver? No, what they're going to get is Phil's example. We shortened or we reduced the no-show rate from 40% down to 2%, and here's the dollar value that's associated with that. So you start to see that communications and overall, I think communications, UCaaS and CCaaS are converging, and the companies that are more effective in taking advantage of that, have the development capabilities natively, are going to succeed.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is the holy grail for a lot of organizations nowadays, isn't it? It's that agility, that differentiation, that innovation capability. And you're just not going to get that with UCaaS as a prepackaged solution.
So I think, let's take a step back, because I think it's really important to stop for a moment and say, if you look at UCaaS and CPaaS and the solutions we're trying to provide, they tie back to driving, the value in the business. And so, first question is, what do you want to do yourself? And one of the things, again, if you look at employee communications that are what I'm going to call generic, and most employees, if it's not involving a business process or application, the way they communicate are generally the same, regardless of organization. It's a video call like this. Buying generic tools like that and not building them yourself allows you to invest and focus on business processes. And that brings back to a really important thing. The problem with UC, and I did a lot of work about 3 years ago on ROI, developed a really big ROI tool for UC and spent a lot of work. The problem is the real benefit value in the end of UC and UCaaS is, if you take away the cost benefits of buying the service and talk about the impact, it's productivity for knowledge workers. It's the meeting starts 3 minutes earlier. We get the meeting done sooner. We get the tools that we have here. It turns out what that does when you go through all the so what analysis, when you do what I call a so what analysis, somebody tells you a benefit, ask the question, so what if there's an answer, you haven't gotten to the benefit. In the end, everything only does three things. It saves money, it increases revenue, or it meets a regulatory requirement. Those are the three things you buy for. The point is, when you come down to UCaaS, it comes down to productivity gains. And it's productivity gains on 15 to 25% of your users, and they're small gains, 5%. So if you look at the business impact, it's not that huge. But if you take the other 75% of the workforce and your business process, if I can save 20% of my lost orders, what does that mean to the profitability of my business and my overall business profit level? And in fact, I go back talking about what we did in Nortel, we actually put some stuff together back at that point in time, back in the 2008 to 10 timeframe, about how application integration would be. The value to businesses can be huge. If you can cut your accounts receivable by 3 days by having good communications, you can increase your profitability by 3 or 4%. Turns out that can give you a 10 to 20% increase in your stock value. You can actually see stock value move because of things you do in communication with application integration. The communication people don't understand how profound this is. We've delivered a service that never got evaluated as really impacting the business for the past 40 years. Now we can walk into the CIO and say, look, I can show you how to increase your profit by 20% by implementing application communication integration. And by the way, a 20% increase in profit for most companies is a 50 to 70% increase in stock valuation. If you can do that for your CEO, he'll kiss you.
Yeah. It's potentially.
I'm actually
Okay, so brilliant. So last question. And this one's, I'm going to start with Fazil, but we're going to put this to the whole room again. We know who's leading the CPaaS market, but who's going to lead it in the future? Is the landscape going to change? And, we've started to see, as you mentioned, a lot of acquisitions of CPaaS companies. We've just seen recently leading UCaaS provider 8x8 even acquire their own CPaaS. So are we going to see more of that? Are we going to see UCaaS and CPaaS become one? Do we have a new as a service acronym coming through? What do you see going forward? Fazil, do you want to kick off with that one?
Yeah, sure. I'll give you some numbers around the CPaaS market first. So with the work that we have been doing with Synergy Research, we see that CPaaS market has hit about $2 billion in the first 3 quarters of 2019 already, and it has been growing at around 40% every year. So it's a remarkable growth rate, and it doesn't seem like it's going to slow down. Twilio today, as we have all mentioned, is the clear leader with about 1/3 of market share, followed by many key players that includes Vonage, Bandwidth, Voxbone, 8x8 is a participant, and many others. To your question of if UCaaS and CPaaS is going to become one in the near future, CPaaS, I think, is going to keep eating into the UCaaS market more and more, especially cannibalizing some aspects that are detachable or very easy to consume, and makes it avoids enterprises purchase big services like UCaaS. So in those regards, there will be more convergence, but I don't think it's going to become one, because benefit of UCaaS is you're simply buying a communication service that someone else is much better at building it. And they keep it updated. They keep adding features on top of it. Why would you bother? Why would you bother doing that yourself? So UCaaS and CPaaS is not going to become one in the near future, but there's going to be an increasing convergence between those industries. In terms of who is going to lead these markets in the future, or the CPaaS market in the future, CPaaS has one problem for participants. It's actually easy to switch between providers, given that you have the ability to make the code changes. Because what is provided as a result is generally the same, assuming that the providers have similar capabilities. So what matters today is the developer ecosystem, the coverage, the breadth of services, and that really means the stickiness of the service, not the end product. So the vendors who specialize in their offerings, who provides a better developer resources, provides better coverage, will always be there. There has already been price wars in the CPaaS market, so it's not only going to be the service and those adjacent factors that are going to be the major decision makers in this industry, I believe. And I believe the consolidation is going to continue, and more UCaaS and CPaaS players might become one, as UCaaS providers are increasing their portfolio of services. But those are just additions to those platforms, because there's so much interlap between those industries and so much upsell you can make. But as I mentioned, it's not going to be one. There are going to be two different industries, I believe.
Great, thanks, Fazil. It's going to get interesting because there's not that many providers out there specializing in just CPaaS. So maybe some more new entrants, possibly even. Irwin, what do you think?
Yeah, I'll take a little bit different opinion. I think the market will continue to consolidate between UCaaS and CPaaS providers, either merging or acquiring, as we've seen over the last couple of years. There really aren't a lot of standalone CPaaS providers out there today. And even if you think about somebody like Twilio, a big chunk of their market now is contact center versus really going as a pure CPaaS provider. So I think you'll see a continued amount of convergence. I think you'll see UCaaS providers continuing to add CPaaS functionality and maybe selling CPaaS services independently as another revenue stream. The companies I would keep an eye on would be AWS. Anything that seems to be billed on a per use basis is something they find attractive, as their go-to-market around time and Connect so far demonstrates. So they don't really have a CPaaS offering that I'm aware of today, but it wouldn't be surprising to see them deliver one over the next year, especially when you think about their huge Amazon customer base of retail companies that would be a good target for them. Microsoft certainly adding CPaaS-like functionality into Office 365, again on either pay-per-use or as a complementary functionality to existing Office 365 customers would be worth looking at. Cisco acquired a CPaaS vendor years ago, one of the first ones I think to acquire one. So I think of the large communication providers are ones that have a good opportunity to dominate the market.
Yeah, interesting. And Phil, finally, last but not least, of course, what's your take on the future?
So I think the first thing is, the challenge of a session like this is we don't have charts. So I'm going to do a virtual chart. So we're consultants, so we have to have 4-box charts, right? You have a 4-box chart. Think about a 4-box chart where on the horizontal you have two things, CPaaS 1.0 and CPaaS 2.0. So what is CPaaS 1.0 and 2.0? Everything we've talked about today is CPaaS 1.0. It's how do you integrate the PSTN, including SMS, i.e. traditional telephony with your business applications. CPaaS 2.0 is doing it with IP over the internet using VoIP, IP protocols, and probably in more cases implementing to the application. So this is a really important thought process. If your business has enough value, your average customer will download your application. Why wouldn't you want to put the communication integration into the application, not have it run separately through the SMS? Because you already have a presence, a brand value presence on that user's device. So think about two ways of doing this. With the PSTN, that's what Twilio did, or with VoIP and IP. That's where people like Candy and Temesis and people that are building these next generation platforms, CafeX was in that space. Then think about the other dimension, the vertical dimension, as at the bottom being no employee involved. It's purely interacting with the customer. This is that notification you get from the dentist, you have an appointment. It's an asymmetric app, it's an asymmetric event to employees. Above that, you have the communication event touches an employee. That changes what you want to do. So you now have 4 boxes. I would argue that most of CPaaS today has been in the bottom left box. It's been PSTN that doesn't involve an employee. A password change doesn't involve an employee. What we're seeing now is this movement up to the upper left, which is where now a CPaaS event involves an employee. And that's where you see the contact center being involved. Flex, that's where UC begins to be involved. So if you're doing CPaaS where it's going to touch an employee, it's not the same as CPaaS notifications that don't touch an employee. And then you really need to think about this VoIP, this transition to IP and CPaaS 2.0, because I guarantee you in a year or two, the idea of getting an SMS versus something cool in an application may be not the benefit, the image you want to put in front of your customer. The second comment really comes to this question of, are CPaaS and UCaaS going to converge? And I'll make the argument that that's not the right question. The right question is, as a customer, you need to provide 3 kinds of communication services to your organization: employee communications, customer communications, application communications. The key question you need to ask is, for us, do we want to buy a suite product that provides all 3 of those, or do we want to buy best of breed for each of those? Do we want to buy a best of breed contact center, a different UC vendor, and a different CPaaS vendor? Because we're an organization that can take advantage of the differentiable value that those provide. This is no different than any other suite versus best of breed decision making in any other organization. But I'll close that with a point. And Irwin made a really interesting point. It's an interesting thought, right? What happens when you have an employee who does 90% of their communications in Zoom, or does 90% of their communications in some other product, could be Office 365 and Teams, but they still need to do the PSTN, and you really don't want them to use their cell phone. You can do that with CPaaS, but there's an interesting thought process here. Why is UCaaS only a per month charge? And in fact, there's a very interesting view. There's a company called 3CX that has a very different pricing offer for UCaaS. They price not on the number of users, but the number of simultaneous calls that are in place. And what's really interesting, they present this as an alternative for an organization to a traditional PBX model. But if you think about the condition that Irwin presented, it's really interesting to say buying that kind of a service would dramatically reduce my cost. So I think for organizations, the key is start with what's the problem you're trying to solve, and then figure out how to optimize your use of platforms, vendors, and solutions to provide that capability to your organization. Thanks.
Thanks, Phil. And I think that probably rounds us up nicely in terms of the conversation today. I mean, we've had some fascinating insights there from all 3 of you. Thank you very much. Fazil, Irwin, Phil, again, it's been a really good session. So and I hope everyone watching has enjoyed it as much as I have. Thank you very much.